Hello, friends, and welcome back to another round of stories about entitled people. Today's story comes from a small-town convenience store in New England, where a part-time clerk meets the most charming little old lady you could imagine. All floral scarves and politeness, until she starts talking about ants. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. All right, let's get into it. Don't let the cardigan fool you. I recently picked up a part-time job at a little convenience store / mini supermarket in rural New England. It's nothing glamorous, but it helps with the bills. My girlfriend's a nurse, so she works long shifts, and this gives me something to do in between writing gigs and trying to remember what free time used to feel like. It's my first retail job. I spent 25 years in newspapers before retiring, and honestly, it's been a crash course in human behavior. You meet everyone: the caffeine-deprived commuters, the farmers who smell like diesel and hay, the teenagers who think whispering makes their vape smell invisible. But amid the chaos, there's one customer who genuinely brightens my day. A tiny old lady who comes in every morning for her newspaper. She's in her 70s, maybe early 80s, and I swear she's about 4'1" on a good day. Always dressed neatly with a little floral scarf or cardigan, and always smiling. She's unfailingly polite, please, thank you, dear, and she has this old-school charm that just makes you want to hug her. If the store's quiet, she'll linger and chat about the weather or her garden. If there's a line, she waits patiently, hands clasped on her purse. She's the kind of customer every retail worker dreams of. So the other day, I'm stocking shelves in the cleaning aisle when she toddles up beside me and asks, "Do you sell ant cups?" At first, I thought she said ant cuffs, and my brain went to the weirdest places. I blinked and said, "Sorry, ma'am, what was that?" She started explaining, and that's when it clicked. She meant ant traps. "Oh, yes, we've got those," I said, and offered to show her where they were. Without missing a beat, she slipped her arm through mine like we were going for a Sunday stroll through a park in 1952. I just went with it. I mean, how do you say no to someone like that? We walked slowly down the aisle together until she spotted the traps. "These look about right," she said, peering at the box. I laughed and said I might need to pick some up too because we'd been having issues with big carpenter ants at home. She looked up at me and, in the sweetest, most matter-of-fact tone, said, "Oh no, those are little effers. I usually just squish them, but there's too many now." I nearly lost it. There's something about hearing a tiny grandmotherly woman drop an F-bomb like she's discussing the weather that just short-circuited my brain. I kept it together until she hooked her arm through mine again and we walked back to the register. The next day, she came in for her paper as usual. I leaned over the counter and asked, "So, did you get them?" Without missing a beat, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "The little effers, they're deader than crap." I couldn't even respond. I just excused myself, went to the break room, shut the door, and laughed until I cried. Edit. To clarify something, I didn't retire as in I never have to work again. I took a buyout last year and decided I didn't want to go back into newspapers. Half my life's enough, so I think of it as retiring from journalism, but not from working. There's something special about those older folks who've completely dropped the filter. No performance, no fake smiles, just honesty wrapped in kindness and a dash of profanity. She's probably seen more chaos than half the town combined. And at this point, she's earned the right to curse out pests however she wants. And our second story. His one-man HOA ended with fines, a misdemeanor, and a permanent wooden barrier. I'm officially done with my neighbor. For years, things were fine between us, nothing more than polite waves and the occasional small talk. Then something changed. He's turned into this self-appointed code enforcer, like he thinks he's running a one-man HOA, and unfortunately his jurisdiction seems to include my property. It started out small. My lawn service is legally required to leave those little yellow flags after spraying the yard, just a warning about chemicals. Totally normal. Well, not to this guy. He kept sneaking over and pulling them out. I caught him once mid-yank and asked politely for him to stop. He immediately got defensive, ranting about how ugly they were and how they were bringing down the neighborhood. We argued, he stormed off, and I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few weeks later, he started nitpicking my lawn. According to him, it wasn't up to neighborhood standards, which is hilarious considering his yard looks like a dandelion sanctuary. Then, after a big storm delayed trash pickup, I left a flattened cardboard box at the curb overnight. Next evening, he's on my porch hammering the doorbell like I owed him money, shouting about how I was making the neighborhood look bad. Before I could even respond, he grabbed the box and tossed it into his bin. I told him to put it back, and he puffed up like he was about to square off. "Try it," he said. "I'll call the cops for trespassing." That was my breaking point. I called the police myself, not to press charges, but to get something on record and ask about mediation. The officer offered to go talk to him, but I said no. I didn't want to escalate or embarrass the guy. Big mistake. Because then came the pool drama. Last summer, we put in a small above-ground pool for the kids. Nothing extravagant, just a place to cool off. The first day we filled it up, he stood on his porch glaring at us like we'd built a meth lab. A few days later, he came over to the fence and started shouting about how the pool was a safety hazard and unsanitary. Then he hit me with this gem. "You can't use that pool. The water's splashing into my yard." His yard isn't even next to the pool area. We've got a 6-foot privacy fence, and the land slopes away from his property, but he doubled down, saying runoff might be contaminating his grass with pool chemicals. He warned he'd report it to the authorities. And sure enough, a few days later, the police knocked on my door. They were polite and kind of amused. One even had to suppress a smirk while telling me someone had reported pool water contamination. I brought them out back, showed them the drainage, the sealed chlorine system, the slope. They nodded, apologized, and left. But not before I overheard one of them say to the other, "We've been here before for this guy." A few minutes later, they were at his door, and we could hear the shouting through the fence. Apparently, he accused them of taking bribes and ignoring environmental crimes. They warned him about filing false reports and told him to knock it off or face real consequences. Spoiler, he didn't knock it off. About a week later, our security cams caught him leaning over our fence taking pictures of the pool. My husband stepped out and told him to cut it out. That's when the neighbor lost it, started screaming about property values and threatening to sue us. We called the police again. This time we filed an official harassment complaint. Turns out we weren't the first. A couple of other neighbors had also reported him. Same nonsense, pulling out their lawn flags, yelling about trash cans. One couple said he screamed at them for washing their car too loudly. This time, the police didn't just leave with a warning, they cited him for harassment and trespassing. Our footage showed him leaning over the fence multiple times. Then the city slapped him with a fine for illegal waste disposal after they found out he'd been dumping other people's trash into his bins to make a point. Oh, and now he's facing a misdemeanor harassment charge because he kept pestering us after being told not to. We capped off the saga by hiring a contractor to install the new privacy fence. 8 feet tall, solid wood, no gaps, watertight. On the day they put the final panel in, I happened to glance out the front window and saw him standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, red-faced, watching the last sliver of our yard disappear from view. It always begins with something petty. Those yellow flags ruin the view. Dude, they're 3 inches tall and biodegradable, not billboards for chaos. But no, he couldn't stop there. And the pool incident? The contaminated runoff speech had me wheezing. Imagine being so dramatic that you treat chlorine like nuclear waste. When the cops show up trying not to laugh, you've officially hit rock bottom. You know what's really sweet, though? The man built his own downfall. You didn't have to argue, you just let him dig that hole with complaints, calls, and trespassing. By the time he hit misdemeanor level, all you had to do was build a fence and enjoy the silence. And our next story. Amish wanted to build a phone booth on my property. So a few weeks ago, my wife and I got a visit from some of the Amish who live across the road. We've got about 16 acres of land, mostly open fields and woods, and they've got their farm directly across from us. They were polite enough, they always are, but this time they had a favor to ask. They wanted to build a phone booth on our property. Now, I don't mean a bright red London-style booth or anything, but one of those simple wooden huts they use to keep a landline for emergencies or business calls. Since most Amish don't have phones inside their homes, they said it'd be a small booth, won't bother nobody. But I'll be honest, the idea made me uneasy as hell. Not because I have anything against them personally, but because it's my land. I don't like the idea of strangers, Amish or otherwise, having a reason to come and go on my property whenever they want. And with past experiences, I've learned that just this once can turn into, oh, we've always done it this way. Still, I told them I'd think about it. That night, my wife and I talked it over. She didn't like it either, especially since the spot they wanted was right near the road, visible to anyone passing by. The next morning, I drove past to look around, and what do I see? The phone lines were on their side of the road, not ours. So why even ask to put the booth here? And then I noticed it, about a dozen shovels worth of dirt already dug up right where they said they wanted to build, on my side. That's when I decided, nope, absolutely not. I wasn't going to be rude, but I was going to tell them no. Not because I don't want to help out my neighbors, but because I've already had too many weird run-ins with them since moving here. See, when we first bought the property, we hadn't even been here a full week before the Amish started coming by asking for hunting permission over and over again. I told them politely, no thanks, I hunt my own land. They were nice about it at first, but it was like every other week someone else would show up asking again. Then came the beer incident. One Sunday afternoon, around noon, mind you, my wife and I are sitting outside when an Amish buggy rolls by. Nothing new except these guys had LED lights strung up inside the buggy and a boombox blasting music. We're talking blaring pop country. They were clearly having a good time. Drinking, too. I figured, whatever, not my business. Until they reached the end of our property and chucked a Bud Light can right into our ditch. That was it for me. I'm not the confrontational type, but littering on my property after all the crap they'd already pulled had me seeing red. I grabbed the can, jumped in my truck, and caught up to them at the stop sign. I rolled down my window, held up the can, and said, hey, you dropped this. The kid, probably early 20s, was grinning like an idiot, clearly drunk, and had a cigarette pinched between his fingers. He raised his fist like he wanted to fist bump me. I just tossed the can into the back of their buggy and drove off. I didn't want to spook their horses, so instead of flipping a U-turn in front of them, I went around the block. But when I checked my rearview mirror, I saw the buggy turning back toward my house. I floored it, got home just in time to see him trotting up the road in my direction. My plan was simple. If he threw that can again, I'd follow him, call the cops, and let them handle the DUI. If he got out of the buggy, well, we'd have another kind of problem. Thankfully, his girlfriend must have talked some sense into him because they just kept going. But since that day, my view of them has changed. A few of them stopped waving when they passed by. One guy even circled my property slow enough to make me step outside, and when he saw me, he snapped the reins and took off. So yeah, when they showed up asking to put a phone booth on my property, all I could think of was how that favor would turn into a steady stream of visitors walking across my land, making calls, leaving trash, or worse. I'm not trying to be the bad guy here, but I'm not about to hand over control of any part of my property, especially to a group that's already pushed the boundaries. So I told them no. I said it's not that I don't want to help you, but I'm not comfortable with anyone building on my land. You've got your side of the road for that. But I'll be honest, part of me still checks out the window a little more than I used to. Because around here, once someone decides your land is convenient for them, it's only a matter of time before they accidentally forget it isn't theirs. Some folks think the Amish are all peace and butter churning. But trust me, they can be just as entitled as any HOA Karen if you give them an inch. I get it. When you've got acreage, boundaries matter. It's not about being unfriendly. It's about keeping control of what's yours. You say yes to one small booth and suddenly it's a community landmark. People crossing your land at all hours like it's a public park. So yeah, saying no is the right move. You can be polite and still protect your space. That's not hostility. That's rural survival instinct. And our last story. Colleagues mocked my friend's salary, then tried to stick me with their bill. His family name cost them a multi-million-dollar client. A year after I moved to London, I was sent on a work mission to a bank in Paris. Since it happened to be my birthday, I decided to organize a small dinner with some old friends I hadn't seen in a while. Unfortunately, a few of my colleagues overheard and decided to invite themselves along. Among my guests was Guillaume, a childhood friend and a facial reconstruction surgeon working with Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. He's about 5 years older than me, and years ago I dated his sister before she sadly passed away from an overdose. I tried to help her get clean, and Guillaume always appreciated that. He's had a soft spot for me ever since. During dinner, the traders from my team started bragging about how much money they were making, Then one of them turned to Guillaume and asked how much he earned. Guillaume answered honestly, and of course compared to them, it was a pittance. They laughed at him. When the check came, those same colleagues tried to dump their share of the bill on me, their expensive wine and all, way beyond what I could afford. Before things got ugly, Guillaume quietly intervened and paid for everyone without a word. The next day at work, those same loudmouths asked me if I felt bad for letting poor Guillaume pay the bill. I just smiled and said no, because Guillaume is rich. I explained that Guillaume's family is the 5th richest in France. He doesn't care about money. He lives alone in a 200 square meter hotel particulier on one of the grandest avenues in Paris and donates his MSF salary back to the organization. Suddenly, these same guys couldn't stop talking about their good friend Guillaume. They started asking when he might visit again. They supposedly had some great investment opportunities to discuss with him and his family. At lunchtime, Guillaume came to pick me up so we could eat together, just the two of us. Since mobile phones were banned on the trading floor, the receptionist paged me over the squawk box. "Mr. Guillaume," very recognizable surname, "is here for you." The boss of those braggarts immediately froze. He recognized the name, a name that carried serious weight in French high society. He rushed downstairs to introduce himself. Guillaume looked him dead in the eye and said, "After 2 of your employees tried to stiff one of my best friends for a restaurant bill, I will definitely not be using your bank for my family's trust fund. And I'll recommend to my father that he takes his business somewhere more ethical." As we walked out, we could hear the boss tearing into the 2 idiots behind us. This story's a perfect reminder that wealth doesn't always come with kindness, and kindness doesn't always come from wealth. Guillaume had every reason to put those men in their place at dinner, but he didn't. He waited until it mattered. He understood something those traders never will. True class doesn't need validation. It doesn't need a brag, a receipt, or a title. It's shown in the quiet moments, like paying a bill for someone else's disrespect, or standing up for a friend when everyone else is counting zeros. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.